Hello, how is everybody? Nice to see you. Today, I don't have a guest, so it's just going to be me, and I'm going to talk about some topics I thought would be interesting to you and answer questions if you have them. I'm also going to talk about the replay of the knit along for this sweater. So first of all, let's see who's here. So we have Marilyn Rotman from Hudsonville, Michigan. Hello, Marilyn. Olga Alvarez from Sebastopol, California. Hello, Olga. Elizabeth Nielsen from Sweden. Deborah Cisneros. And Carolyn Finnerman from Central Oregon. CDR Butler from Virginia. Mary Inman from Atlanta. Catherine Continental Combined from Germany. That's a mouthful every time, but I love saying it. Elena Mazuka from California. Marie Tobita from New York. Diane Joel from Smoky, California. Yes. Karen Tierney from Oregon. Donna Beaton from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I think it's Amy from New York City. Hello, Amy. Tarja Kallio from Finland. Susan Day from Washington, another smoky place. Oregon, California, Washington. We've got a lot of smoke. Margaret from Chile. Rebecca Sanko from Orlando. Fatima from Portugal. 37 Vega Lira from California. Kathy Trykowska from Melbourne, Australia, which they're just coming into springtime now. Beautiful time of year. Angie from Marlow, Washington. Baka Knitting from Antwerp, Belgium. I like saying that one too. B. Carb from Michigan. Francoise from France. Wendy Lang from Arlington, Virginia. Ruth Stubbins from Vancouver, BC, and quite a few more. Be sure to give me a thumbs up. So today I just had some things I wanted to talk about, mostly some common cast-ons. We're going to compare them, contrast them, talk about the pros and cons and how to work them. Also, I just started a revisit of the knit along that we did for this sweater here. This is called the It Takes a Guild cardigan. It has a cable down the back, and you can do the cables in the same color as the sweater or contrasting color. I give you a variety of cables to use, a variety of ways to do the shawl collar. This happens to be in 2-color brioche. I have these wonderful pockets that are my original design that are knitted in as you go. They're not seamed in. They're completely done by the time you finish knitting. And a gazillion other things that you learn along the way. It's like an adventure, a sweater knitting adventure. It's quite a few pages. I think it might be 42 or 62 pages. It's actually a tutorial. It has a gazillion videos linked in it as you go that cover all the little topics. And then while this was a live knit along, I did once a week live streams like this and answered people's questions. So I started replaying those. They're going to come out every Wednesday. So the first one just came out this Wednesday, and I have them scheduled to come out every Wednesday until it works through the whole knit along again. So if you have questions, you can put them over in my Ravelry group, Knitting with Suzanne-Bryan. There's a thread right there for people that are currently working on the sweater. If you want to see what people have done with the sweater, you can go to the pattern on Ravelry. It's called It Takes a Guild cardigan, and see all the pictures of a lot of different participants' interpretations, because each person's sweater comes out original, a unique work of art from them, because I give you so many options to try. So I'm going to take it off because it's kind of warm here today. It's only supposed to be in the 90s, but that's still a little bit warm. So I'm going to switch over to viewing my hands. Let me get this moved here and make sure that we can see my hands. Yes, there's my hand. Yay! So I made a bunch of swatches, and let me see if I can get them all in here. Let me move this needle. Okay. Almost see them all at the same time. This one, and let me focus. And if you have questions, you can ask me anything you want. I may not know the answer, but if I do, I'll try to do my best. But start your question with the words question in all caps, so it's easy for me to see it over in the chat. Okay? And so I started out, the order that I did these is this is the standard longtail cast on, and I did the cast on in a contrasting color, the green. So the thumb yarn and the finger yarn were both the green. And then this is the thumb version of doing the longtail cast on, and they look exactly the same. I'll show you both, but it produces the exact same results as this. This is the thumb loop or backward E cast on. This is the German twisted or Old Norwegian cast on. This is the knitted on cast on, and this is the cable cast on. So some of the things that we can see right off the bat, let me get a little bit darker. Okay, maybe if I turn it this way, yes. Okay, I know this is sideways, but we can compare some things. So on the long tail cast on, you can see that the tail is on the left-hand side when you're looking at the right side of the fabric. So this is the right side, and each one of these has 7 rows of the white knitted on top of the green. This is the thumb version of the long tail cast on. Again, you can see that the thumb yarn is, the tail is over to the left. This is the backward loop cast on or E cast on. The tail is to the right. The German twisted cast on, the tail is to the left. This is the knitted on cast on, tail to the right, and the cable cast on, tail to the right. So one of the things that this tells us, if you're using the right side of the cast on for the front of your work, if you're doing a long tail cast on, the first row that you work needs to be a purl row. So that puts your tail over to the right. To the left. I said it backwards. It puts your tail over to the left because our first worked row is going to be a purl row. Same with the thumb long tail cast on. When you're doing the backward loop cast on, your tail ends up being to the right, and your first row is going to be a right side row. So you can see the last row that I worked 7 rows. The working yarn ends over here. I might be saying it backwards. German twisted cast on, the tail is over to the left. First row is a wrong side row. The first row here is a wrong side row also. These are wrong side, wrong side, wrong side, wrong side. Then right side, right side. So let's take a look at these. First, let's take a look and see how stretchy they are, okay? Just to compare them. I'm going to pull them out as far as they'll go. That's the standard long tail cast on. This is the thumb version of the standard long tail cast on. This is the E over the thumb backward loop cast on. This is German twisted cast on. This is the knitted on cast on. And this is the cable cast on. And I'm pulling them each the same. So right off, we can see pretty much how stretchy they are. The backward loop cast on gives you the most stretch. And we'll talk more about it. So that's a pro. That's a pro, but it has some cons too. The standard long tail cast on gives you quite a bit of stretch, as does the thumb version of doing the long tail cast on. And the German twisted cast on, those are all 3 about the same. If we were to measure those, That's 3 3/4, 3 3/4, 3 3/4. They're the same. These three are exactly the same. Then the knitted on cast on is shorter than all of these, and the cable cast on is the shortest. So it has the least amount of stretch, next to least, most stretch, and then these three are the same. Now let's look at the fabric that they produce. I'm going to take them each one off here and we'll look at them, and then I'll show you how to make them. Okay, so this one is, I'm going to make this bigger so we can get up close and personal. This is the standard long tail cast on. This part of the cast on, this strand right here that go along the bottom, those are what went over the thumb. This part right here is what went over the finger. So this is the row of stitches that were on the needle after you finished doing the long tail cast on. And this is the strand that ran along the bottom underneath the stitches. This looks strikingly like the first row of knitting, doesn't it? But it is not. And it is not counted as row 1. It is the cast on. This would be row 1 up here, right here. So this is the cast on. Then I worked 7 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I started with a purl row, so my working yarn's over here, and I went this way, and by doing 7 rows I end up with an odd number, so my yarn is ending over here again. This is still a little bit too bright. Let me make it a little bit less bright. Okay. The biggest mistake that people make using the long tail cast on is counting this first row as row 1. So let's say you cast on and your directions for your sweater say, let's say knit, work, not knit. You're cast on and you're going to work 14 rows, and then you're going to work 13 rows and you're going to make an increase or decrease. You're going to do some shaping. So that would be, a wrong side would be row 1. This would be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 13 would be wrong side row. And then you would do a right side row would be where your decrease is, or your increase. But if you counted this as row 1, you would end up being on a wrong side row to work your increase or decrease. We're assuming you're working flat, not in the round. And I'll bet that that has happened to you before. I bet that you have counted up from the bottom and thinking that you're going to be on a right side row and your work is on a wrong side row. This often happens like at the beginning of armhole shaping or waist shaping and stuff like that. So the biggest takeaway from this is that this is not row 1. It is the cast on. And you'll see that obviously in a minute when I actually show you how to do this cast on. So the thumb one is the long tail cast on. It's exactly the exact same structure. So we don't need to discuss that. This is the backward thumb cast on, backward loop, E-loop, call it all different kinds of things. And you'll often see this cast on recommended for casting on stitches at the end of your needle. For example, the underarm stitches, if you're knitting a sweater bottom up or top down, you're going to be casting on some extra stitches. This is a nice stretchy cast on, yes, but it also has absolutely no structure whatsoever. It really doesn't. And I cast these on pretty tightly, and I'll show you how I do that. The other thing I don't like about it is that no matter how careful you are, If you're using this to cast on stitches in the underarm, whoops, we use this yarn. If you're using it to cast on stitch, well, I better use the white yarn. Hold on, I need to get another piece of yarn. Here it is. Let's say I was going to pick up stitches. And I like to pick up the stitches in a column. Like here's a column coming up. I like to pick up right here, so it looks continuous across the join. So I'm going to pick up a stitch. And then I go over to the next column, which is going to be here, and pick up a stitch. And what happens is that bump between the two stitches shows through to the right side of the work. Do you see the green thread there? So as I go along here and pick these stitches up, I end up with this line. And so it interrupts the stitches going from one side of the fabric to the other, and I don't care for that. So I'll show you when I demonstrate when I show you the knitted on cast on, I use that instead for adding stitches at the end of the needle. And you know, you can only add stitches at the end of the needle. You can't really add stitches at the beginning of the needle. Then this is the Old Norwegian cast on. It looks very similar to the long tail cast on, except it has this extra added little decorative line of stitches across the bottom. I like this cast on a lot. I fell in love with it one time and I used it for just about everything for a couple of years. It's a really pretty cast on. It depends on what you're going to be doing after this, whether it complements it or not. It does complement a lot of stitch designs. Then we have the knitted on cast on. And what this does is it creates this single little loop that goes across the bottom of the work. And it's a tight cast on. It doesn't have very much give. A lot of times people, when they're first learning how to knit, the person who teaches them to knit will use this cast on because it's an easy cast on to teach. But you can see it's really not ideal. If you were trying to knit a pair of socks and you use this as your cast on at the cuff, there's no way you'd get that over your foot. It's a very tight cast on. It's easy to learn, but it's a tight cast on. So it would be good for areas where you don't want a lot of stretch, like maybe buttonholes, or like for me in the armpit. This is the chain cast on, and it is the tightest of all cast ons. It really has pretty much absolutely no stretch whatsoever. And it looks very similar to this one. It's got this loop line that goes, but these are double. Can you see where there's two strands? And this is a single. It almost resembles the Channel Island cast on, which gives you double strands like this. The Channel Island cast on is stretchier than this, but it gives the same look. This would be very durable because it has that double strand. It makes it a very strong cast on. It's perfect for buttonholes. Something the buttons are going to be going in and out and in and out, and pulling on this. It'll keep your buttonholes from stretching out of shape. So let's talk about how do you create these cast-ons. So we'll start with the standard long tail cast-on first. I'm going to use two colors just so you can see the difference between the finger yarn and the thumb yarn. I'm going to have the finger yarn be green and the thumb yarn be the white. So when you do a standard long tail cast on, you have the tail over your thumb and the working yarn goes over your finger. You can come up under the thumb and you pick up that finger yarn and pull it back down through the thumb, and then you use your thumb to tighten it up. Then I put my finger here to hold this. make my next stitch, and then I leave a big space there. My finger acts as a brake. It keeps that stitch from going up too tight. I move my finger. And this is how I do a long tail cast on, and I've made many videos about this. This is how some people make a long tail cast on. They think it needs to be really tight, and they go like this. They rock their fingers to make sure it's nice and tight and tidy. And yes, it does look tidy, but let me show you the difference. Looks very tidy. This one here, where I had the spaces, we could say that I cast on engage. That's what I call it. I say I cast on engage. So if this is worsted weight wool, or number 4 with a US 7 needle 4.5 millimeter, you should expect to get about 5 stitches to the inch. I cast on about 5 stitches to the inch. If it's fingering weight yarn and I'm using a US 1 needle or 2.25 millimeter and I want 7 stitches to the inch, I cast on 7 stitches to the inch. So let's see what this does over here when I pull it onto the cable. Do you see the difference? So what this tells you is that the thumb yarn is what determines how stretchy the cast on is going to be. Now, let's try something even different. You know, you can use this cast on to cast on in pattern. So if I want to cast on a knit stitch, I go like this. That's a knit stitch. If I want to cast on a purl stitch, I do the mirror opposite. Move this yarn out of the way. The mirror opposite. I come up under the finger, under the thumb, and take it down and do a purl stitch. Let's do 2 of those. So I'm going to cast on in knit 2, purl 2, and I'm still leaving that space. I'm casting on engage. Let's do a couple more. Now let's compare this, the stretchability. This is my stretchability test. There's the ones apart. These are cast on in pattern. So they're really stretchy, but still those ones in the middle where they were tidy were not stretchy. I find that this and this work really good for socks, and I don't have to do anything special. Now I'm going to turn the work, and I'm going to use my white yarn, and I'm going to purl the first row so we can see what these stitches look like. So now I'm creating the first row. And I'm going to work these in pattern because I cast on in pattern. You can see how it looks like the purl bump below, so you know those are purls. These look like they're the long side of the cast on, so you know those are knits. Purls. These are all going to be purl all the way across. Okay, let's take a look. And turn the work. And there's those green stitches that look like the first row, but that was the yarn that went over the needle, wasn't it? That was the finger yarn. Looks like the first row, but it's not. The first row is the white stitches. And you can see over here where I cast on in pattern, I'd have to work a couple more rows for you to see it, but here's the knit stitches right here. Here's the purl stitches, and it looks really good. I have a couple videos on that, and you can see what a finished swatch looks like. But you can also see here just how it lays. I'm not doing any pulling on it. I am not pulling on these stitches, but you can see how these are spaced out and how these are really tight. Can you see that? So that's the long tail cast on. Let me take this off, and I'm going to show you how to do the thumb version of the long tail cast on. And it's not that you necessarily need to do it, but some people do it, and I want you to understand that it is the same cast on. So I'm going to still keep the green. Let's see, I'm going to put the green over the finger, white over the thumb. So normally when you do the long tail cast on, you start with the slingshot position, and you have the working yarn in your left hand going over the finger. You come up under the thumb, you grab the finger yarn and pull it down through, and you release the thumb yarn. So to use the thumb method, you keep your thumb exactly the same, don't change your thumb, but you're just going to move the working yarn over to your left hand as if you're going to throw. You still have the thumb yarn exactly the same, and this is the same position for the backward E-loop cast on as well. You put your needle up, and instead of catching the green yarn from your finger, you throw it over. You go up under, throw the yarn. And it's how tight you pull the thumb yarn that determines how tight your cast on is going to be. So you don't want to pull the thumb yarn too tight. And it's a hard habit to break if you're used to doing that. Excuse me, I need to get a little drink of water here. Let me do a couple more of those. So you have the thumb yarn, it's just like doing the backward loop with like this, and then you hold the yarn in your right hand as if you're going to throw, and you just throw the stitch over the point of the needle. This is a long tail cast on. It's the exact same cast on. Now, if you were going to do the backward loop, you do it like this, and you just continue casting on. But look which yarn's going over the needle. Now it's the thumb yarn that's going over the needle. And these you do want to pull up pretty tight, because I'll show you why. These you want tight. I don't know if you've ever used this for the underarm of a sweater casting on, but even when you cast on really tight, when you get to the end of working them on the next round, you sometimes end up with a lot of extra yarn, a big space, a gap. So then you would work the first row, and I'm going to do it in the green yarn just so we can see. Come on, green yarn. Okay. And you can see right away how loose it gets. Do you see how it just, whoops, I split that. Suddenly it gets really loose. And that's because the yarn has been going around the knitting needle. So it makes a really big loop. A lot more yarn than what is between the stitches when you do use the thumb yarn for the long tail cast on. So the size of the needle determines how big these stitches are. And of course, most likely you're going to be using the size of the needle that you're using for your garment. So you end up, let me work it back a little bit too. I'm trying to avoid knitting back and forth, but I want you to see how stretchy these are. They have no structure whatsoever. See? It's because they just have so much yarn because they went all the way over the needle. I don't care for them, and I certainly don't like that bump that shows up on the front of the work as I demonstrated. It shows up even in your work if you're picking up stitches under the arm. Let's look at my gray sweater. Let's see what I did with it. Oh, I used a different cast on. I used the knitted on cast on because there's no bumps. I like the stitches to go all the way across as if there's no interruption. So let's look at the next cast on. This one is the knitted on cast on. So we'll look at the pros and cons of that. Let me pull this off. Are you learning anything? Is any of this new? Is this new to you? Or have you already seen this? This time you need to make a slip knot. And you hold the yarn on the left needle rather than the right needle when you do this cast on. Start out with the work on the left needle, and then you go up through the loop as if you're going to knit, and you pull a stitch through as if you're going to knit. Now, you're going to put this stitch over on the left needle. You have a choice of putting it on this way or this way. It is your preference. You can do it however you want. I put it on this way because then my needle's in the correct position to make the next stitch. I'm just going to knit through that loop, and this will get really tight really easily. So you need to pull up a little bit of extra yarn. Even if you do that, it still gets really tight. So I'm putting it on this way. You can choose to put it on this way, but if you do, do it every time the same way. But then you have to take your needle out, bring it around, and go in again. So I put it on this way. That saves me that one extra step. This is called the knitted on cast on, and you can see why often it is taught to people in beginning knitting because it's just like making a knitted stitch. I have met people who've been knitting their whole life that still use this cast on because it's the one they learned and no one has ever shown them a different cast on. And they assumed that it was the standard cast on. I've even been in knitting classes where the instructor said, you must know the long tail cast on to take this class, and people knew this cast on. They assumed it was the long tail cast on. So that's the knitted on cast on. It makes that very tight edge. The difference between that and the cable cast on is very slight, but it makes a big difference in your work. You start out the same way with the slip knot, and you're going to knit the first stitch and put it on here. Same, you start out exactly the same. Now, instead of going up here to make the new stitch, you're going to go between the two stitches. Grab a new stitch and pull it through, and you've really got to give yourself some extra yarn here because this will get super tight and you will not be able to make new stitches. You won't even be able to get your needle through. So you've got to pull through some extra yarn. Even so, it will still tighten up on you. So you're pulling stitches up between the two stitches. And that's what gives you that double twist along the bottom. You can see both strands are twisted across the bottom. And this gives you an extraordinarily tight and durable cast on. The last one I'm going to tell you about is the German twisted cast on. So there's that cable cast on. Cable cast on and knitted on cast on are not the same. A lot of people think they are, but they are not the same. and they have completely different characteristics. You don't want to mistake one for the other. Okay, so now we're going to do the German twisted cast on. And again, I'm going to use a second color here, so you can see what's happening. The white is going to be the thumb yarn, and the green will be the finger yarn. In German twisted cast on, you start out just like you do for the long tail cast on with the slingshot position. And point your finger and your thumb towards the ceiling. Then in long tail cast on, you come up through here and grab the yarn. For German twisted cast on, you come up in the center between both the finger yarn and the thumb yarn. Then you come down in the thumb yarn. I advise turning your thumb down, your knuckle down, swing over, pick up the finger yarn and pull it down through the thumb yarn, and then release the thumb yarn. Now watch what happens to the thumb yarn. You're getting an extra twist to it. Let's do it again. You come up between the thumb and the finger, down in the thumb, bend the thumb, pull the finger yarn down through the loop, let go of the thumb, and watch what happens. Do you see the extra twist around the base? That extra twist, you can see it, very interesting. Let me make this bigger. So here's the extra twist on the first stitch, that part, and here's the extra twist on the second stitch. And you see how it prevents the two stitches from pulling up tight together? They can't. So basically this does the same thing as what I was showing you by giving spaces between the long tail cast on. This is why people will say that the German twisted cast on is stretchier, is because there's more space in the thumb yarn. So you come up in the center, down through the thumb. Now if you don't bend your thumb and you go over and you pick up this yarn, then you got to swing back up and down. It gets kind of confusing. So what I do is come up, go down in the thumb, bend the thumb so it opens this loop here. It makes it easier to pull the green yarn through the loop. Now you can do it however you want. I'm just showing you how I do it. And it's too hard. It's very hard to make this too tight. See, it automatically spaces those stitches out. So that's a nice cast on. So let me see if there's any questions here that I can answer about these cast ons, and then we're going to talk about SSKs. So let me go up here. Could you do a provisional cast on using the working yarn there, more structural than a backward E? You can do a provisional cast on, but I'm not talking about that this time. In a future one, we'll do provisional cast ons. This is from Survivor Builder 3.14, Survivor Builder Pi. Question, are there any rules of thumb for transitioning from ribbing to cables like an Aran sweater? Do you know some ways to find how many to increase and cast on without swatching like crazy? Well, what you're talking about is the difference between the stitch gauge of the cable and the ribbing and the background fabric. And this is called stitch equivalency between one fabric and another. I highly advise swatching for a while, many times, until you kind of figure it out for yourself. For me, my rule of thumb for me, non-scientific, but just based on my experience, is for each cable that, let's say you have a 2/2 cable, 2/2 cable. I only want to cast on 2 stitches for that 2/2 cable. And right at the end of the ribbing, before I start the cable, I will cast on the next 2 stitches in that area so that now I have 4 for the cable. That's my stitch equivalency. So it's half. If you have a 3/3 cable, I would cast on 3, and then you would have to increase 3. So I cast on half of the number of the cable legs, not the background fabric. Let's say your cable is 3 stitches, and then 2 pearls and 3 knits, and it's going to go up and it's going to cross. I only consider the legs of the cable, so that's 6 stitches, not counting the 2 pearls in between. I would cast on 3 less, and then I would add those 3 right after the ribbing at the base of the cable. I also like it when the ribbing transitions into the cables. I think that looks really nice. So then you would be adding your stitches in between the stitches or on the edges of the ribbing. I have many videos on that also. It's called cable flare compensation. If you look it up, I have cable flare compensation cast-ons, cable flare compensation bind-offs, and stuff like that. That's a great question. And that makes a big difference in how your work looks. So I think you asked that twice. That's good. Okay, let me go down. Is the backwards loop cast on useful for anything at all, or is there always a better alternative? I don't care for it. Now, if you're just swatch casting on, like, I think that it would be fine if you're casting on for a gauge swatch and you don't want the cast on to interfere with the fabric. It would be fine then. This is for Amy. Question, what cast on would you suggest for a cowl with a garter stitch border? In that case, I use the long tail cast on and I use the bumpy side as the right side. So let me show you that. That's another good question, because I think that the bumpy side is more likely to match the seed stitch. You can cast on in pattern for it also, so I'll do both. So listen, that's a knit, a purl, a knit, purl, knit, purl. And then we'll do a few just knits and we can compare it. This is how I learn. I just sit and I cast on things and I try them and I compare them. I do this a lot and I learn. So that would be, normally we would consider this the right side of the long tail cast on, but for seed stitch, I like to use this side, the bumpy side. So let me work, I'm gonna use the white yarn now. Let's use the green yarn. I just contrast so you can see what is the cast on versus not. So now I'm gonna work in seed stitch. Let's see, we want over here, we're gonna want a purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. So this can be a purl. Knit. I probably did it wrong. Nope, we got it right. So I want to knit above the purls and purl above the knits from the cast on. So that would be called casting on in pattern. Now this is a purl, so I need to knit it. I cast on in pattern a lot. I also bind off in pattern a lot. It's these little things that make a huge difference in the quality of your knitting. And I like details. Okay, so let's take a look at this now. We've worked 2 rows. We have our cast on and we've worked 2 rows. This is the right side of the fabric because we worked a right side row first. So you're going to get, this is the one where we did not cast on in pattern, and you're going to get the bumpy edge along the bottom. This is where we cast on in pattern, and it doesn't look so hot right now, but it does when you get more work going. That would be the right side. The wrong side would look like this. This is where we started. Do you see those? I don't care for that on the right side of garters, of a seed stitch. On garter stitch it would look fine, but I don't care for that on the right side of seed stitch. It doesn't blend with it. I like this much better. All the bumps are there. me see. Let me get a swatch for you. Okay. That's the bind off there. This is the cast on down here. Let me get a little bit, make your picture bigger and clearer. Okay, so on this side, this was cast on in pattern. It's not smooth across the bottom. It looks the same on both sides. It actually looks better on this side. This is where I wove the end in right here. But I don't have that smooth side on either side, which I don't care for. But it's personal preference. Try it yourself. You know, work some swatches. Let's see if there's any more questions. Can you show the cast on for knitting a pie circle? The pinhole cast on. I have a video on that, but I'll show that when we do the provisional and invisible cast ons, because that's an invisible cast on. Marilyn says, question, I also wondered when the e-cast on is over the preferred method. Ever the preferred. I don't, it's personal choice. So once you try all of these and you experiment with them, then you can figure out what you like. Irene, question, the pattern I'm working on has buttonholes created by casting off 2 stitches in one row and casting onto the following row. Which cast on option would you use? Well, what do you think? Which one's the tightest? It would be the cable cast on, because you want your buttonhole. You don't want it stretching out of shape. Renee Pertassis says, hello, Renee. Hello, Renee. Jennifer Sanders, question, can I use a contrasting yarn for my thumb yarn doing long tail cast on? Yes, to have an intentionally accent border. I do that a lot. It looks so cute. It's adorable, like around the cuff of a sweater, around the bottom. You know, so if I use the green, let's say I'm going to knit in the white, and I knit the green as the long tail cast on, then when I come back and I work the white, it gives this nice little line along the bottom of the border. It looks so pretty. It's sharp. And when we do the invisible and provisional cast-ons, maybe it'll be next week, I don't know. I'll show you the crochet cast-on, and it's also pretty to use as a decorative border. So now you just have that little line across the bottom. It's very pretty. Katharina says, could you talk about corresponding bind-off for cable cast-on in particular? Not today, but I will. That'll be a future video when we talk about bind-offs, and I'll match them up with the cast-ons. Great question. Sue McVicker, is there any instance you can think of that you would use a cabled cast-on for sock cuff with ribbing top down? No, absolutely not. You would never get it over your heel. Sue McVicker, let's see. Anita, question, if directions call for backwards loop cast on for underarm, would you recommend using smaller needles for those stitches? Well, I would just use a different cast on. You could use a smaller needle, yes. Yes, you could use a smaller needle. Another thing you can do is cast on like 2 fewer stitches, and then you can use that excess yarn that you get at the end to put on 2 more stitches. That would work fine too. I just don't care for those little bumps that show through to the front of my work when I go back to pick up the stitches. And Joanne Young says, sometimes I use backward thumb loop when pattern calls for adding stitches in the middle of work. There you go. There's another use. Does anybody else have any questions on that? Now I'm going to move to showing you some of my thoughts on SSK. So I worked some fabric here. The standard SSK, I want to get this in really good focus. That's pretty good. The standard SSK is worked like this. I'm going to get away from the edge a little bit. And this doesn't have anything to do with continental or throwing, okay? Don't worry about where the yarn is coming from. The standard SSK. SSK stands for slip as if to knit, slip as if to knit, knit through the two together through the back loop. So you slip as if to knit. Let me make this bigger. Now when I slip this stitch as if to knit, watch this stitch. Watch and see what happens to it when I slip it as if to knit. Did you see it unwind and get fluffier? Because when you slip as if to knit, you're going against the twist. So it untwists a little bit and it makes a bigger stitch. Do you see now how both of those stitches, this stitch is bigger in diameter than this stitch? Can you see that? And then you put them back on the left needle, or the left needle to the front, and you knit them through the back. That's how an SSK is supposed to be done. And invariably it makes, first of all, it makes a lopsided stitch that does not mirror a knit two together exactly. And it makes a bigger stitch. So it's not only bigger, but it's lopsided. There are some ways that people have tried to fix it. One is, and this one always gets me, and I know when I was interviewing Roxanne, I kind of laughed at the person who asked. I wasn't laughing at the person, I was laughing at the technique. One alternate is they say to slip as if to knit, slip it as if to purl, put the left needle in the front, and knit through the back. So what's happening now is the front stitch is not twisted, but the underneath stitch is twisted, and it does make it a little thicker. It does not make this look any better. But what gets me, the reason why I laughed is, so this is the direction: slip as if to knit, slip as if to purl, then knit through the back. That's silly. What if you just do this? This stitch is already mounted purl-wise, the second one, right? That's its normal mount. Why should you have to slip it? You slip the first as if to knit, put it back on the left needle, and knit through the back. There's no reason to slip that second stitch. None whatsoever. Now, let's work over, and we're going to work an SSP because I want to show you something. An SSP is an SSK worked on the wrong side of the fabric, on the reverse stockinette stitch side of the fabric. When you do an SSP, and most people that I've watched do it wrong, when you do it correctly, it should look exactly like an SSK. So the SSP means slip as if to knit, slip as if to knit, and purl through the back loop. So first let's talk about purl. This is how you purl, right? And this is how you purl through the back loop, correct? You come up. When you purl through the back loop, you come up and purl. You don't go down because that would be a knit through the back loop, correct? So if you're going to purl two together through the back loop, you have to come through the second stitch and then the first stitch. So SSP, the directions are slip as if to knit, slip as if to knit, put them back on the left needle. Then you have to purl them through the back. That means coming in the second one and then the first one and purling through the back. And I'm going to work, I think I split it. I have to watch myself when I'm knitting. I was watching the screen. Okay. And you're going to purl through the back. And now I'm going to work across to the end. And we'll look at these. I'm actually going to work one more row. so they get down from the needle a little bit. Okay, so let's look at these. Let me get my focus going good. Okay. These are the first two that we worked. This is the very first one that I worked where we slipped both stitches as if to knit and then worked them through the back. So you can see that the column of stitches comes over and it leans to the left and then goes up. That's an SSK. This one, we worked exactly the same way. No, this one's twisted. We slipped the first stitch as if to knit. We did not slip the second stitch as if to knit. So look at the difference. You can see the difference right away. Let me get bigger. On the first one, that second SSK, the second slip stitch, goes completely underneath this, the first stitch. Here's the first stitch right here. The second stitch goes completely under it. You can't even see it. Here's where you slip the first stitch as if to knit. You did not slip the second, you slipped the second stitch as if to purl. Look at that leg hanging out over here. There's no leg hanging out over here. You have to go underneath to find it. It's underneath that. Over here, it's hanging out. And this doesn't look any better than this. Then we worked the SSP. Look how tidy that is compared to this and this. It's really pretty. And that's been my quandary. It's like, why does the SSP look so good? Because you're slipping the stitches, you're untwisting the yarn the same as you were over here. So let's look at it again very carefully. We'll do the SSP and then we'll do one more SSK. So I'm going to make another SSP. Okay, we're going to slip as if to knit and the yarn will unwind. Watch it. Did you see it get fluffy? And we're going to slip as if to knit, another fluffy stitch. We put them back both over to the left needle, and you can really see how they're untwisted. See how loose the twist is? We bring, now, this is the difference. When we bring the needle from back and we come up under that second stitch and then the first stitch, we're very low on the right side. On the front side, we're very low in that stitch with our needle. And so when we pull it off, all that excess yarn of those stitches is pulled to the back of the work. And that is the difference, because watch when we make the SSK on the right side. And there is another method, you've probably heard it and seen it, that does correct this. So now when we make an SSK on this side, the right side, we slip as if to knit, and it got fluffy, slip as if to knit, then we put the left needle in the front and the right needle is down low on the back side of the stitches. It's low. So what happens? All that extra yarn in the stitches is pushed to the front of the work. Do you see that? Now that's what makes it big. So this is what some people propose, and I think it's probably the best solution. You slip as if to knit, slip as if to knit, put these both back over here, bring your needle through, pull the first stitch off, keep your tip in the second stitch and pull on it, then take it off. And what that does is it shrinks the size of the top layer of the SSK. Let me work back. I think that that is the real solution to making tidy SSKs. Aside from working on the tips of your needles, you still need to work If you notice, everything I do on the tips of my needles. I work on the tips of the needles. I use the barrels for sizing the stitches. There's the last one we made right here. Here's the one before. This is the one on the knit row. You got all that yarn. Here's the one we just made on the purl row. So try it yourself. See what you think. Experiment. That's the best way to learn. Let's see if there's any questions over here. Oh, this is a really good question. I'm running out of stitches here, but I can still show you. Sue M says, what's the difference between an SSK and a slip one, knit one, pass slip stitch over? Okay, so slip one, there's no difference whatsoever. This is it. You slip one as if to knit. You knit one. You pass the slip stitch over. It produces the exact same thing. And try it. Some people like that better than the SSK. The SSK was actually developed by Barbara Walker. In her first Treasury of Knitting, she describes it for the first time, and she tells how she figured it out, that it produces the exact same results as a slip one, knit one, pass slip stitch over, but she thinks it's faster. But you can see the results are very much the same. I think this is the one that we did that we liked the best right here. So, any more questions? Let me see. You can do an SSP on circular knitting, yes. But if you want it on the wrong, you know, it depends. If the purl side of the fabric, if the wrong side of the fabric is facing out, yes. But if you're just working all right side rows, then an SSP, you can't do that. That's only for flat knitting to compensate. Okay. So I think that's all. Let me switch back to my face. There I am. Hi. Let's see. Mary Decker says the design I'm working on has a knit two together along the right edge and an SSK along the left edge, just backwards to what I've learned. Do you know why they would do this? It might be a design element. I would look at the garment to see if it's part of a design element. Usually I work them the opposite. Let's see if I do knit two together, SSK. It depends. You know, the toe of a sock, you start with an SSK and a knit two together at the other end. Same thing around a neckline. But look at the garment and see, it might be part of a design element. Also, I didn't just speak to this, but most likely it may have color work in it. Does it have color work in it, Mary? Is it like a slip stitch pattern or a stranded knitting or any kind of color work? Because there's a difference between blended decreases and full fashion decreases. A knit two together on the right with an SSK on the left is called full fashioned. An SSK on the right and a knit two together on the left is called blended. If you're having color work and you want the color work to go more towards the edges of the fabric and not be covered up by the decreases, then you would work them opposite to what you normally would. You would work a knit two together at the right and an SSK at the left. So, let's see. Okay, so we've been on here for an hour. And Mary, so it may, if it's a lace design or it has some other stitch pattern in it, it might also be because of that. If it's plain straight stockinette, then you can do it the way you want. And you can do it the way you want anyway. It's your yarn, your needles. And if you know the difference and you understand what you're doing. I met a lady one time who she only used knit two together because she couldn't see a difference between the knit two together and an SSK. So if she couldn't see it, then it didn't bother her. It would bother me. More like feathered decreases. Yes, it looks like feathered decreases. So that's it for today. We'll do this again next Saturday, and I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about, but it'll be something, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. If you haven't done my knit along yet on the sweater, now's a good time because everybody's going to work on it. A bunch of people bought it again, and a lot of people are looking at the YouTube videos for it. It's really a gorgeous sweater. It's a work of art. I show how to do these cables. You don't have to do these cables. You don't have to do it like that. But if you want, I show how to do them. I give you a variety of cables to choose from. Give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, this one and my other channel. My goal is within the next 12 months to get 100,000 subscribers on my other channel. I'm coming up on 72,000 subscribers, so I need some more. This channel, I just passed 4,000 subscribers this week. That's very exciting. That's a milestone. And Julie Hutch YouTube, is that an antique sewing machine in the hallway behind you? Yes, that was a Singer sewing machine, and you know they're made in New Zealand. Did you know that? I didn't know that. They were made in New Zealand. And it's the one I learned to sew on. My grandmother taught me to sew on that sewing machine. And when she died, that's what I got. I got the sewing machine, which is exactly what I wanted. We can talk. Melody says, I'd love to hear more about full fashion and blended. We can talk about that. So I'm going to slow down on interviewing people for a while because there's lots of things that I'd like to just talk about like I used to. So I'm going to have interviews interspersed with just these live streams. So, but it'll always be something interesting. I'm sure that you'll enjoy it. So I'm going to let you go. Thumbs up. We'll see you next time. Have a good afternoon. And I'm going to take a nap now. Bye-bye.